do that thing that I do, where I hit that button and then it, does the thing where it records all of us.
All inaudible, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Welcome back to OT After Hours, a podcast about industrial cybersecurity, why it matters, and all of the challenges that it presents. Before we dive into topic, we should probably go around and introduce ourselves, or at least say hello, because I don't think we have anybody who's new this time around. So I'm just going to go left to right across my screen. Dylan, how you been?
Hey, Ken. Not too bad. I know I was on the first episode and then kind of disappeared after that, so glad to be back.
Brilliant. Doug, is your iPhone working?
It is. Can everyone hear me?
Hey, there you are.
Hey, right. Thank you. I appreciate the patience, guys.
No worries. And Tyler, how you been lately?
Out here in the OT Wonderland, Ken. Thanks for having me back.
Love it. And Drew, good to have you back as well. How you been?
It's been great, man. Thanks for having me back. Happy to be here. Yeah.
Awesome. And I am still Kenneth Kully, still running the podcast. They still let me get back in front of this microphone. So I guess we will just keep this thing rolling for as long as we can.
So what's on the bucket today, man?
Well, so I'm going to lead off with a story, and then we'll let Doug take it from there. So literally 20 years ago, actually slightly over, 21-ish, maybe 22, I was a much younger whippersnapper than I am now, and I was working as an engineering summer student for Husky Energy here in Alberta at one of their plants. And the first summer I was with them, I was working with the SCADA crew. So like I've been in OT, if you hear me tell my story, it goes back to then. My first real exposure to it. But I was working with their SCADA crew. And the SCADA system was this ancient Valmet automation system that was running off of PDP-1184s, computers nearly as old as I was at the time. And actually, I think slightly older. I was younger. But anyways, first summer there, lots of fun. SCADA programming and then like some support programming for, did some access database work and some Visual Basic work to just kind of help things along and make things work a little bit better than they were in the SCADA office out there. The second summer I was there, one of my main tasks was decommissioning the PDP-1184s because they were going to a newer and now Windows-based Valmet automation SCADA system. And the question came up, well, what do we do with these PDP-1184s? And I mean, like...
Don't tell me you still got them at the house.
I don't. I don't think my wife would let me keep PDP-1184s at the house. We just don't have the space for that. But, like, they were... as 1184s went, they were kitted right out. They had maxed out the RAM. They had the big hard drive platters, everything you would want in a PDP system. What are we going to do with this? But probably the correct answer would have been, I don't know, recycle it. Not that there was as good electronics recycling at the time, but my supervisor happened to be doing a little bit of looking online. And so he came by my office one day and he's like, I have a project for you with the PDP-1184s. I want you to put them on eBay and see what you can get for them. So I did. And ultimately I sold them to some kind of facility in Ireland. I like to think that it was one of the distilleries, but I don't actually know. But, put them on eBay, listed them, and also spent time like cleaning them up because, hey, they'd been in, server cabinets. So blew all the dust out of them, cleaned them up, and, photos, got it all on eBay. And someone paid, a couple grand for them. And then there was the challenge of actually like fitting them into cargo crates and shipping them across the ocean. But someone bought this ancient hardware for a fair, decent penny, which made the office manager really happy. And who knows, they could still be running today. But
probably find them on Facebook Marketplace next or something.
Well, that would, I guess, be the modern solution, right? But and I think, Doug, you were the one who suggested this phrasing, but like you were calling it the auto wreckers of OT. And it got me thinking, because I know we've made this joke a couple of times on episodes already. I know I've made this joke a bunch of times in various conversations. We have that conversation. What's your backup plan? eBay. Because, I guess it goes to show that like there's this really long, you could insert like a Bene Gesserit joke here. Our plans are measured in centuries, because this stuff has a really long lifetime. You're not putting hardware in on like, your standard Dell IT 3-year replacement cycle. It's going in for the long haul. The servers and computers you're installing, they're going to be running for a long, long time. Good grief. We just had one of the salespeople asking around if we had any software support for Windows 98, because a client was curious, or a prospective client was curious, because apparently they were still running Windows 98. I don't know who they were, but apparently they're still running Windows 98. This stuff has such a long, long lifetime when it gets deployed to these operational environments. And after a while, it kind of becomes more difficult to find ways to keep it limping along when stuff inevitably starts to break. You can't buy a new PDP-1184 these
days. For that. Yeah.
Wow. When Ken mentioned that, it brought me back to some of my early days as a field engineer when we were doing a Q to R migration, right? We were modernizing the I/O stack, or the I/O modules for a power plant. I remember seeing someone show up that wasn't from our team. And I asked one of the site engineers about this person, and he was doing almost like an assessment, and that's when I first heard or learned about this industry, right? So there are still a lot of sites, anywhere from automation sites, from power plants, pharmaceutical, different manufacturing sites, that are still running on legacy equipment. So it opens up the door for this market that they will come in on these decommissioning of sites, and they will negotiate with the customer so they can buy the product at a discounted rate and then resell it. So it's almost like I'm sure you still find them on eBay, but what these companies, the service they're providing is, you're not buying it just on eBay, but we are following these specific scrubbing protocols, right? We're almost giving you the stamp of approval that this has been formally scrubbed, vetted, and ready for operations. But of course, and where this conversation comes together from an OT cybersecurity standpoint is, what are these standards, right? Who's regulating, who's governing, and as cybersecurity engineers ourselves that provide, that our jobs is to secure or increase the security posture of our customers, how do we make sure when facing these legacy equipment, how do we make sure that they are safe to continue to run in the environment? And I'll hand it off to you guys. Tyler, I know you, with your years of experience, I'm sure you've come across a lot of these.
Well, I was just about to say, Tyler should probably share the story that he was sharing just before I punched record.
I'm sure he's seen some dinosaurs.
Well, I've got a very similar one to Ken, too. Like some of my early days in the municipality out there, they were running like a C3 ILEX system on OS2 Orb. And it had one of those daisy chain ribbon cables for like a chassis extender and all that good stuff. And I just like took one look on my first day there, and I'm like, what the heck is this thing, right? And that's kind of what you automatically gravitate towards is, okay, well, how do we repair this if something goes out? Because, well, and, that was back in the days too. I mean, this isn't as prevalent as what it was back then, but, you just didn't even look at it or reboot it, say anything about rebooting the thing, because then it's kind of a crapshoot on whether it's actually going to come back up or not. And the municipality I was at had that issue at that time, right? You try to reboot this C3 ILEX server and everything like that, and you're kind of like bated breath on whether it's going to boot back up or not. So yeah, it's a very commonality, and that was a long time standing out there where it was if it's not broke, don't fix it type of mentality that's out there, and kind of still is today, when you've got a lot of those components free out there. So, oh my gosh, and that's just one example. Hell, I even have a more recent one too. So, like, I went to this facility, and they have this sit blowing PLC, and the controlling aspect of it is this old AT computer in the corner that's still running MS-DOS on it. And, the pointed question out there was, okay, well, what are you going to do with that when it, dies on you? Oh, I've got 3 more of them in the closet back there. If one of them dies, I just swap it out and we're going to go. Because they were exactly the same. They were like 3 identical PCs right next to each other, MS-DOS running like SIP blowing for unit 1, 2, and 3 and all that. And I'm just like, okay, well, he's got a valid point. He's good to go, So I think it just really kind of comes down to your use case out there too. And depending on if you really need to have that telemetry out of those boxes, right? Well, maybe some of it, you got some hardwired telemetry going into the DCS. Maybe it's more modern. So you're getting the correct signals and everything like that you need to control the modern aspect of the whole ecosystem. But, we're going to run DOS over here on these guys, right? Each into their own type of thing, right? I don't try to preach too terribly much on the modern aspect of things because it all gets down to, what your use case is out there and, how it's going, like how many people know how to go back there and hack MS-DOS, especially if it's not like connected or anything like that. But, you get to the point of, well, what happens when you like use that third PC you had for a spare out there? Well, that's when the chips are down, right? So
yeah. And one thing I remember asking my boss back then, how do we prevent these to remain in circulation? And it's in the US, right? There is, compared to other countries, right? There's stronger infrastructure and there's funds for that. But using my island of Puerto Rico as an example, they are in some serious debt, right? So capital funding for power generation and infrastructure is limited. And those are target markets or target audiences for this market of buying aftermarket, not having to do a major investment. And that tends to keep these dinosaurs in circulation. So I've seen certain companies trying to take action on that, such as, hey, instead of selling it to this third-party legacy provider, we'll give you a discount if you upgrade all of this, right? That's one business case that has been somewhat successful. But as a whole, right, for these cases in which these companies or utilities don't necessarily have the funds, how can we, as cybersecurity engineers, ensure the proper, again, scrubbing, scanning, and ensuring that these legacy items can, if they have to, remain live? How do we mitigate any vulnerabilities?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that just comes down to the aspect of the component, right? Just talking about that MS-DOS system. Sure, it's sitting in the corner doing its own thing, right? But no, I definitely see your case in point. And realistically, the other thing too out there is if there's ever been a way to make a buck out there, people will try to find out and how to do that, right? Like when I was back in college, back in the day in the early noughts, had a guy I knew in college. That's what he did. He actually bought lots of old servers and he'd part them out. It's kind of like the old salvage yard type of situation, right? He made pretty decent money on it.
Auto wrecker.
Yeah, literally. So, there is markets out there for it. And, especially when you've got, different nations out there that are in different aspects of where they are financially as far as being able to afford different things, they may not be able to go out there and grab the latest, Ovation or GE or whatever systems out there to be able to make things going. So that's kind of where they're at,
Mm-hmm.
Well,
even on top.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead.
Yeah. Even on top of that, Tyler, you run into there are companies that use eBay. It's not even just like small guys that are parting out a couple servers or some lots that they found. There are some big boy companies like Radwell. You can sell your PLC used equipment to them and they'll buy anything you take to them, but they'll give you maybe between 1% to 3 to 5% of what it might be worth. But I think that's because they have to sit on it forever. It probably sits in a warehouse and it's probably, it's probably in a warehouse that looks like the Ark of the Covenant from the end of Indiana Jones. There's so much of this equipment still out there and it doesn't die. Like I working here at Verve, and just some of the stuff that we see in our lab, we bring a lot of stuff in secondhand off of eBay, just to kind of get a crack at it, take a look at it if we have to do some configuration work or just kind of see how this older tech works. And I'll bring it in, and it'll be dead at first. You might have to order a battery, you might have to do a couple things, but I start emailing with tech support with the manufacturer, like, hey, I've got this old model in. Can I get some schematics? Can I get, do you still have any parts or anything like that? And I'll oftentimes get emails back from the support people like, oh, that's long dead. You're not even going to get that thing started. That's not always. Well, not always. I mean, I fail sometimes. But we get these things started from like 50, 60 years ago, and they run just fine.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it makes sense for you to do that, like, with what you and your team do, because you're the lab and you're part of the group that...
Absolutely correct. It is a testing environment. These things can fail in the lab, and it's not a big deal. It's not like they're out on a factory or actually being used in production. But I do wonder how many people do it.
Yeah, but the reason you're bringing them in is because we know that at some point we are going to encounter them out there in the factory if we haven't already. And this is a way for you to work with them, figure them out, and then hand that off to the development team so they can build a driver for it so that we can actually pull data from these oftentimes very ancient devices that are still out there, still doing their work, still talking. And, like Doug's point about less economically fortunate nations is well taken. But realistically, you see the same problem here in Canada. You see it in the US with smaller operators, especially, right? Because, as a country, fine, we're doing pretty all right. But individually, at the level of business decisions, when the upgrade path is a capital project and you're not going to recoup the costs of that capital project over the projected remaining lifetime of the system you're upgrading, you're not going to upgrade. You're going to try and keep it limping along on whatever spare parts you can find until you absolutely have no choice.
Right. And it leaves it open for, lack of monitoring, lack of logging capabilities, these type of safety standards or security standards that aren't hitting par for the course on our expectations nowadays. So they're no longer supported by their original vendors even.
Yeah, no, you do run into that a lot. And if you think about it, on some of this resale gear, the chain of custody is long lost. If it's made it to eBay and it's been in a couple different storage units and stuff like that, we don't know.
You had to bring up chain of custody.
That's gone. So you bring that vulnerability in too. So you better be able to take a look at the device in a non-production setting to make sure that it's running and actually functioning the way that you think it should.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for the regulators to figure out, maybe we should start imposing some standards around the use of these third-party reconditioned devices. I don't know if that's already happened yet, but if not, I imagine it's going to come up at some point because, what's the vetting process for that reconditioning, right? How do you know that what's done to blank and, essentially factory reset these devices and clean them up and get them ready to ship out the door? How do you know that that's all that's been done?
Right.
And if you think
whether
about
it's a
these,
knockoff,
so many of these are just little Linux computers under the hood. So
pretty much.
BusyBox.
Yeah. BusyBox or VxWorks.
VxWorks.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I know I worked for a company that pretty much they would win service contracts for pulp and paper industry. And strictly it was because of their stock of old parts for the machines they were working on. And it's just, I know their testing process and there's no way you can get certified in any of that, but just based on their reputation with working parts, sometimes the manufacturer would go with them over, the OEM for the equipment because they weren't checking it. You'd get a couple boards and they'd be bad, and that's just how it goes. Got to pay for a new one if you can't get a warranty on it.
Yep.
All right. What about, so I know probably several of you guys have been to these sites. Have you ever been to a site they're just hoarders? because, they get like another facility or whatever that
man.
closes down, and they're just like, oh, give me that. Do. So they got like rooms, just racks and racks and racks of just all these different components out there for like different things. So like, I remember one of the sites I went to, it's like they had every single bit of all the pneumologics from like 3 other plants that had shut down. And I'm just like sitting there looking at it going like, wow, guys, okay. It's cool you got it, but still, they're just kind of holding on to it and everything like that, So the shameless plugs, like if you're in the market for some pneumologics, I might know a couple of places,
I definitely saw it a lot in my previous at my previous employer, because man, and again, they would have whoever the control system vendor was. I mean, obviously, I worked for a different vendor than I do now, but yeah, like and it was actually really, really common. You just walk into like, the server room, and it's like, oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of extra switches over there. And, yeah, that was from that unit that got decommissioned, and that's from that facility that decommissioned. And they're even holding on to like past gen switches, like, from the last time they did a control system upgrade 10 years ago, because you know what? Hey, in a pinch, you can still slap, a config on them, plug them in, and it'll work for a while. And sometimes that's all you need to keep the plant going.
Oh yeah, those are solid gold, and don't mind like there's a couple of ports that are like not functional.
Yeah, right. So yeah, like just I know exactly what you mean. Like just that. Yeah, you walk into the server room and it's like a server rack, spare parts racks. And there's often more spare parts than there are working parts at any given time. If the facility's really been attentive to that, but I mean, what in a lot of cases, like what's the alternative? Because you have such this long time horizon for when you're going to do an update. And even if controls vendors are, more cognizant of that than, say Apple or Samsung, even if their support lifetime for this equipment and the ability that they offer you to buy components is going to be a lot longer than, pick some sort of IT hardware vendor of your choice, I guess. Even if they're going to, recognize that they're going to have that longer operational window, at some point they're still going to be saying, no, like this is this far and no farther. Like this is the line. And if you're older than this, like, sorry, we don't sell that anymore. And then what do you do? Because you're still going to keep that paper machine running for another decade if you can.
Well, there's a market for that too.
There's a whole other side of this too. With all the equipment, you have the physical equipment, but then sometimes you have to track down the actual software that will let you configure the device. And that software can also be in a no man's land. Actually, recently, think like I was looking for some telecom equipment. I was looking for their software, and I ended up finding a CD of it on eBay for $50. I ended up picking that up. So we have that. But the whole time, like I noticed that company, like in the 70s, was doing really well. But at some point, they got bought out by Nokia. And Nokia actually had some documentation around the software still out on the public websites. So I was able to access this information and kind of point it. And then so I went back to Nokia and I was just like, hey, you have this stuff. It's on your public website. It's on this, and I've got a couple of URLs, and here's the guide. And so you do have some stuff about it. Do you have anyone in the company that could, talk to me about it? And they could not find. I mean, we kept after that. I kept pushing back. I saw the email bounce around to a bunch of different departments, and they were finally like, yeah, we don't have that anymore. That doesn't exist. So if I wouldn't have found that CD on eBay, we would not be able to configure that device anymore.
Solid gold. I think I know the box you're talking about too. That's the one down in Jerseyville, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the one that looks like a little R2D2. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. It's still in use out there.
Well, it's on. I don't know if it's in use.
Well, I meant it's in use at a customer facility, because that's kind of why we do our targeting like that, because it's still out there.
Oh yeah, for
right?
Sure. I thought you meant that specific unit. Okay.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's just kind of a world of possibilities out there too. And Drew, you bring up a great thing out there, because trying to find support for that software too. So you might have had to like spin up an old Windows 98 VM out there just to even get the software running or some crap like that, right? So it's wild. DOSBox.
Ooh, I had to use it before. Try talking to was it the old GE Fanuc PLCs? Could only use Logic Master 90. Try finding that out there in the wild.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Andrew kind of outlined sort of a better case scenario. I didn't even touch on the idea of acquisitions, but I mean, a lot of times, yeah, you'll have somebody gets bought up by somebody else, and in a really, really, the best case scenario is, well, we'll keep those product lines kind of, as like a legacy thing, and we'll keep them around for a while. But a lot of times they just disappear, they go away, and it's like, well, now what do I do for support? Upgrade? Nope, not shelling out $2 million. Thank you. To eBay it is.
Okay, I'm going to go off on a tangent here because this just kind of hit my brain, and I'm just like, yeah, this is totally different. So, all right, so think of it in this regard. Okay, so you had a vendor-supplied system come in, and the one that I'm thinking about in the back of my mind, because I had to work on it at one point in time, was this O2 skid. Basically, you had this compression mechanism with like a piping system with a bunch of valving and stuff on there, and it had a PLC that controlled all the valving and the cycle times and all this other crazy stuff, right?
Okay.
Oxygen skid. So, been there forever, right? And it got to the point of where we had a contractor in there wanting to modify a couple of things on the skid itself because it was acting up and everything like that. Well, lo and behold, nobody had the program for the guy at all. So, and I don't know what you guys' background as far as PLC programming or anything like that, but I mean, there are some times you can actually extract the program out of it, but it doesn't have the pertinent tags per se around, kind of the intrinsic of, here's what this output and this input does and things of that nature. So you're basically kind of reverse engineering like an entire program just based off of some of the intrinsic IO tags instead of like some, familiar names for your tags and everything like that.
Kind of like the PLC 5s or the slicks. Anytime you connected to them with RS Logix 5 or 500, if you didn't have the original program, you would never have any of the tag names. So you had to just look at the schematics and tie it to the actual inputs and outputs and kind of guess what everything else is.
Mm-hmm. This was exactly that case, right? So, then it comes around to the components. So it's like, okay, well, if trying to practice good hygiene out there as far as, backing up and having the documentation for all of our stuff too. So I know this kind of predicates out some of this additional stuff as far as dated hardware, but then we're also talking about the datedness of the documentation surrounding it. Or does anybody still have that floppy reader around on the USB drive?
Oh man.
I still got
the printed binders.
Right?
With the updates written in there.
Or the dot matrix printouts with everything on it, whatnot. I kid you not, I still keep around a USB driven 3 1/4 floppy. It just to have it,
Yeah,
I have it around,
as well.
So you never know when you're going to come across that, 3D print of the save icon type of thing,
Right. Yeah, no, I still keep one of those as well. It's part of my extended kit for, you mentioned dot matrix printer. I still have that story I led with. One of the projects that I had was, and this is not, this is totally a tangent, but one of the projects I had, one of the first projects I had there was actually figuring out how to take the information. So next to the PDPs in their little server room, there was a dot matrix printer, and it would spit out production accounting reports. So one of the first things I had to do was figure out how to get those to print on the production accountant's in-office HP LaserJet. Because a PDP-1184 was a powerful computer back in its day, but at the end of the day, it is not multi-threaded. It is not, it doesn't do a lot of the things now that computers can do to work around a frozen process. So if it fired off a print job, which was one of its periodic tasks to put that production accounting data onto the dot matrix printer, if the paper jammed in the printer, and that was not uncommon with dot matrix printers, somebody actually had to go and like physically unjam the paper, or the PDP would not be able to continue doing processing tasks. And you had a 17-minute window to do this, or the entire SCADA system would come crashing down. So yeah, one of my first projects was basically like, we need to figure out some way to like pull the data off of that thing serially, then get it over the network somehow and get it to the printer. So yeah, not related at all to like the spare parts discussion, but it just, you mentioned dot matrix printers, and it just, I have flashbacks of, you know.
Like, yeah. You know, that thing was like where you can't hear a picture.
Yeah.
Picture dot matrix print, right?
I could hear a lot of pictures. I can hear so many pictures.
Oh my gosh.
Man. It's just...
It's like, no kidding. You found those like on every freaking SCADA system out there imaginable. Like those old like Oki Data 8-pen printers out there. And I still think you can get them today still, because there's just such a demand for them still, you know, and that the ream of paper with the oh my gosh, the drive for the drive motor and everything like that for the side that you could tear off on both sides of the piece of paper or whatever. Oh gosh, help me out here, guys.
I can't remember the technical term for it. I just remember that grade 5 me was incredibly distracted by those little tearaway strips.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the school had a couple of dot matrix printers, and you know, the reward for those of us who were kind of ahead on schoolwork for the day was you could go and like climb on one of the Apple IIes and like tap out a story or something. So then of course we would have to go and print it, as one did. And then, of course, you know, the real reward was not the writing, because you know, grade 5 me was not a great writer by any means. But, oh, man, those little strips of paper, and then you could, like, fold them into accordions or, like, do all sorts of weird stuff. The best. The best.
Oh, yeah. Well, you ever make, like, the braids out of them and stuff like that, too?
Yeah.
Crazy point of fact about that. I just, while you guys were reminiscing, I do remember these from my childhood as well, too. But I just typed dot matrix printer into eBay. Apparently, if you have one of these in the basement, you should get it out right now. It's worth like $100 to $300.
Hey, which version? I might know there's a couple.
Tons of brands out there. Man, that's crazy to think that people still demand them for some reason. I don't know if they're selling. People are listing for that.
Supply and demand all day long.
Well, and I think, you know, I mean, the thing about it is, and actually the challenge I had when I was trying to develop that program for the production accountant was the fact that like the data that was being sent like off the serial link was like, it was all formatted. It was formatted perfectly for what the dot matrix printer in the server room could print, right? So, you know, all the fonts were monospace, of course. And like you're getting into like issues that only occasionally crop up now when like, you know, you're telnetting into some old system where there's like, you know, kind of strict console width settings. Like it's the same sort of issues as that, where like, you know, there were certain character widths that you had to respect, certain, you know, or like, I mean, not character. Yeah, I guess like maximum character width, like across the print area that had to be respected. And so like trying to account for all of that and factor that in, that was nightmarish. But it's also, you know, me as a young programmer trying to like figure that out and make it work off of an HP LaserJet. Like that was hard. And so I can totally see why there would be like still a demand, because if you have any kind of system where, you know, you have print jobs that have that, you know, set column width of characters encoded into the data stream somehow, like you can't just hook up, you know, even if the ports line up, right? Like even if it's, you know, you're coming off of a parallel port and you're going into another parallel port, you can't just hook that up to your standard LaserJet and expect it to play along. So I could totally see that dot matrix would like fetch, like there'd be a bit of a demand and a bit of a high price for them, because they work in a way that other printers can, but don't necessarily do so by default.
I'm just trying to think now. I'm trying to think. There was a time, and just because I dabbled a little bit on this too, I think there was a time where you could actually take a serial output, because it was just basically kind of a TTY interface coming out. You could dump it in, and you could dump it into like a Linux system that would receive like serial data. And I think you could actually put it into like your cups daemon, and it would like reprocess it for like a laser output or something like that. But that was mind-numbingly crazy to go through all the different steps and processes to get that all converted over, right? Because you had a couple of different intermediaries and all this other crazy stuff that you had to go through to make it actually happen.
Yep.
And oh my gosh, yeah, that. Well, and we're still doing that today too, because there's such demand still for that thing. So you gotta come up with these kind of hackerish type of solutions to make things work, and that's very much a typicality in these OT systems, right? Because some of them were just very either specialized, or like to Drew's point, like they've gone out of business or something of that nature. So you got to reverse engineer it to try to keep it running and all that, right? So I guess that's the flip side of it. Go the eBay way until the demand of your Okidata printer goes up to $800 a pop, or you bring in a potato to the program it to spit out to your laser that you just picked up at Walmart.
Well, that's what summer students are for, right?
Right, interns. It's amazing what you can get done with unlimited amount of interns, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, been there, and it's entirely true.
I think we've done a really good job of outlining the problem. I don't know, like solving it is the conundrum, really, because like you're really up against, do you upgrade millions of dollars, or do you buy suspect equipment that from a secondhand market? And I don't think the industry really has a great, like we've looked at that, and some companies actually do a lot to keep their devices off of secondhand markets. I've run into that like with especially like firewall gear and stuff like that. You'll run into that like Barracuda and Fortinet. Some of their higher end boxes, you won't be able to factory reset them. You won't be able to do anything. So like once you get locked out of this box, you're pretty much out of luck unless you go through like a recertification program or something like that. So yeah, there really isn't a cheap way of fixing the old equipment other than buying this old gear and hoping that it works. And so I mean, I guess that opens up the space for all the other controls that are in these environments and why they're so important.
I mean, hopefully it's not going to push vendors in the direction of, enforced obsolescence. Things just have a set lifetime and that's it. I don't see that working out well for anybody.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up earlier, but I'm glad you did. The whole planned obsolescence thing is, I get kind of reasoning why some of the vendors go out there and do it, but it's just like, I don't know. There's some times where it just kind of seems a little bit underhanded. I mean, you see that a lot out there too. Trying to think the most recent one out there. This is kind of somewhat outside of the tech field or whatnot, but John Deere on some of their like right to repair type of situations and some of the technology that built into it, like some of the different housings and technology that's built into it, or where one particular aspect isn't supported anymore, things of that nature. So you do get a lot of cut over into different industries as well, and not just like a lot of the major industrial or manufacturing and stuff that we're typically used to as well.
Yep. It's a difficult problem to solve because, well, I mean, I don't even know if there is a solution to it because, it's a Scylla and Charybdis kind of thing. Like, how do you get past that? You just kind of keep going through. And in this case, what does keep going through look like? Well, you just kind of keep running your plant and you take what steps you need to keep the current hardware more or less functional. I mean, until such time as, you do come around to a point where you can do an upgrade project, but again, that's not your typical 3-year refresh cycle, and it's not as easy as just, mailing someone a new laptop and then a shipping label to send their old laptop home. It's, it's a vastly more complicated thing than dealing with any sort of, IT type hardware upgrade. And, it impacts the facility, it impacts operations, it impacts budget because of course the facility is down while the control system is down.
Right.
And yes, these things do need to happen at times, but they are not going to happen on, that sort of ideal timeline to keep everything fresh and current and not leaving you scraping around for spare parts.
Right. Well, let's scenarioize this. Okay. So perfect example. And I think we talked about electrician Bob, at one of these plants, right? Bob the electrician, right? So Bob's no longer an electrician. He's upgraded. He's an I&E tech out here, right? So good job. Great job, Bob. So he's out here. He's an I&E technician for a plant. And there's a component that goes off. Well, they don't have any spares on hand or whatnot or anything like that. And it's putting a damp on production, right? They're not going. So, what are the typical outcomes when you come into that? Maybe he's found a way to maybe try to hotwire a couple of things on here to keep the production going. But then he goes to the facility manager and is like, hey, we'll call the facility manager Greg. Hey, Greg, Bob here, I got a component that went down and we don't have any spares. I got it working, but we might want to think about replacing that. Well, what is Greg going to say in that situation, right? It's like, well, can you find one out there somewhere? What can we do to, kind of remedy the situation, right? Well, what is Bob going to do, right? He's going to go hunting around on eBay or one of these resellers or something like that.
Yep.
Try to get the best deal out there, right? Hell, I've been there before, like I need a mod bus converter. I'm going to get the cheapest one I can just buy off of wherever, right?
Well, I mean, ideally, he wants to be able to purchase this out of, like the, he wants to be able to get this done below the threshold where extra signatures are required.
Exactly, right? Hey, I can get anything on a local ticket as long as it's under $50, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That type of situation. So, maybe he goes out there, he finds his component for $49.95, whatever, with shipping and everything, whatnot.
Free shipping this weekend only.
Yeah. So, Bob's living large, right? So he gets the component in, he swaps it out and everything like that. Victorious Bob, we're going to have a pizza party in your name because you fixed the facility, right? Type of thing. So, I think it's well and worth, that's what the typical folks do around out there, right? So until it becomes like a larger issue out there through some type of other type of criteria, whether it be like cybersecurity, whether it be other types of mandates or something of that nature, typically they're going to go with the easy lever every time, right?
Yep.
So I think that's kind of the causality of what we're at right now, because one of the major components I've always seen is kind of the insurance component. It's been driving for cybersecurity side. Well, they were signing all these kind of blank policies out there or blanket policies out there for cybersecurity and everything like that. And then everybody started collecting them because we're getting hit and everything like that. Well, insurance companies wised up. It's like, hey, we need to put a little bit more stipulations around that. Make sure you guys are doing your due diligence before we put a rider on you guys, right? So that's gone around a couple of different cycles, and all that's starting to get tighter and tighter and tighter. And there's certain things now to where if you're going out for like a cybersecurity policy or something like that, they just won't underwrite you. Or if they do underwrite you, it's for a ridiculous amount of money.
Yep.
Because you haven't answered these questions correctly as far as, what are you doing for your due diligence, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So that's that driver, right?
Yep. And I mean, Well, money is the great driver in pretty much every respect, right? Whether it's the insurance and the premiums of insurance. And, I've seen a couple of those insurance surveys, and this is going back 10 years now, since I had to kind of guide anybody through filling one out. But at least one of them did actually ask about hardware redundancy solutions.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay. So in some respects, maybe under the right interpretation, having that shelf full of spare parts is actually advantageous from an insurance standpoint, at least. But,
right.
Insurance costs are just one factor, right? The capital project costs of upgrading, versus time to remediate when you're faced with downtime because your plant's offline. So you're not producing whatever you're producing and you're losing money by the minute.
Right. So then it becomes an exercise of not only economics, but dollars and cents. So this one component affects entire operations of my plant. This component only cost me $50 one time to just keep it on the shelf. Whereas if my plant goes offline, I'm losing money to the tune of, maybe $1 million an hour or something like that. And I'm spitballing numbers here, right? So, your incentive lies on, guess what I'm going to make sure of that's on my shelf, right? Yeah. So it is a strange dilemma, and we're just kind of in the middle of it too. And, I think we might be getting off track just a little bit, but it's because we just come from all of these different backgrounds. So you just kind of see that as it's coming down the pipeline, not only you have this undertow of cybersecurity side of it too, but you got this other economic side of it as well that you're trying to look at it. So everybody's getting hit from multiple different directions as far as, people's needing money for specific different things and everything like that. So you're just trying to decompose the need to be, what's the least amount of money do I need to pay out to be effective on this and have the least amount of impact on me, right? So once again, almighty dollar.
That's not the happiest note to end on. It's a problem that's in need of... Well, what's up, Andrew?
Real quick, I know we're trying to wrap this up, but there is a product out there on the market that does give a fairly good idea of what assets are in your OT environment. And it does let you, knowing what you have really does let you write your battle plan for how you're going to protect it. And I just want to plug that real quick.
Yeah, we all do.
Shameless plug out there, Drew. Yeah,
we make a product that puts food on my table and solves this problem.
That is the most shameless plug we've had yet. That's amazing. I love it.
There you go.
Yes.
And a segue.
Well.
Sorry.
That's great.
And you're welcome.
I got nothing. I got nowhere to go after that. That's amazing. So on that note, that is it for this month. You have been listening to OT After Hours, a podcast about industrial cybersecurity, why it matters, and all of the challenges it presents. Please share our episodes with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and anyone else you think would be interested in industrial cybersecurity. And, shameless plug, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast has been produced by me, Kenneth Kully. Our opening music is by the ever so talented Octo Sound. Look him up if you need some music for a podcast or a video. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Doug. And thank you out there for listening. We will talk to you soon.